The first time Jasper Vale saw me, I was sitting on a crate in the back kitchen of the closed railway canteen, eating a bowl of scorched rice I had scraped from the bottom of a pot that should have been thrown away days earlier. The room smelled of old frying oil and damp wood. Sunlight slanted through a bent metal shutter and turned the dust into a slow, glittering storm. Flies circled my hands, impatient and bold, and I was too tired to wave them away, so I let them land and then stole the grains back with my fingers. I was almost 7, but hunger had already taught me the arithmetic of survival. The body can keep going on very little if the mind agrees to stop hoping for more. Jasper appeared in the doorway like a mistake in the world, a stranger where no stranger belonged. He wore a paint-splattered jacket and carried a canvas bag that looked too heavy for photographs and too light for tools. He stared at me as if he had walked into a scene he couldn't unsee. Then he said, "Stop." Not harshly, but with a kind of panic, as though the word might undo what he was witnessing. He stepped closer, crouched until his eyes were level with mine, and held out a square of dark chocolate wrapped in crinkled foil. "Eat this instead," he told me. I didn't know why I listened. Perhaps the wrapper's clean shine felt like authority. Perhaps I was simply drawn to anything that wasn't the sour, smoky bite of burnt rice. I unwrapped it and bit down. The chocolate was bitter, almost medicinal, and it melted at the edges because his hand had warmed it. I swallowed anyway, because bitterness was still better than emptiness, and because the chocolate carried a foreign scent orange peel, maybe, or a kind of city air I had never tasted. Jasper watched my mouth the way someone watches a match to see if it will catch. "What's your name?" he asked. I stared at the floor. Names were dangerous. Names could be used to call you back or call you out, and I had learned to keep mine inside. Jasper waited without rushing me, the patience of a man who had spent years trying to make light behave for a camera. Finally, I whispered, "Lena." He repeated it softly, as if practicing a prayer. Then he took a broken twig from the corner and drew in the dust. A circle for the sun, a crooked house, a bird. "Birds can leave," he said. "They don't have to ask permission." He came back the next day with water and warm bread, and did not ask why I had been left there. Instead, he asked small questions that didn't feel like traps. What kind of games I liked, what stories I knew, whether I could read a little. When I shook my head, he didn't sigh. He drew letters in the dust and let me copy them with the twig. He stayed until evening, and on the third day he was still there when my mother and father finally returned from the hills. My mother's belly had been huge when she disappeared, as round as a drum under her faded blouse. When she came back, it was flat, and in her arms was a newborn boy, swaddled in a towel, his skin pale and his fists tight, as if he was already holding on to the place he had won. Our village lived under rules that were spoken like weather. Too many children brought inspectors. Inspectors brought fines. Fines brought ruin. My parents had been hiding to give birth, because a son was the only thing people forgave rules for. My older sister Mira, 10 years old and already useful, had been taken to my aunt's house days earlier. I had been left behind because I was the kind of child who could be forgotten without immediate consequence. Jasper stood up when he saw my parents, and his voice changed. "Where have you been?" he demanded, not like a neighbor, but like someone who believed adults should be accountable. My father frowned, annoyed by the inconvenience of being seen. My mother pressed the baby closer and avoided Jasper's gaze. That night, my mother cooked a chicken she couldn't afford and placed both drumsticks into my bowl as if she were paying a debt quickly before it grew. The meat was undercooked. My gums bled as I gnawed, but I kept eating, because eating felt like proof that I had been chosen to stay. My mother stroked my hair with fingers that shook. "Don't blame me," she whispered. "A family needs a son. You'll have a better life with him. He has money. You'll be safe." I clung to her legs and begged, promising I would be quieter, smaller, easier. My father yanked my hands away with impatience. "If you stay, we pay," he snapped. "We don't have money to feed fines and mouths." Jasper arrived on a battered motorbike the next morning, the engine loud enough to drown out my mother's sobbing. He owned only one helmet. He set it on my head and tightened the strap. The helmet was too large. It wobbled as if I were carrying a small planet. Yet when the visor lowered, the world looked quieter, contained. My mother ran beside the bike and shoved a packet of peppermint candies into my palm. Candies she used to lock in a tin and ration like rewards. "Eat them all," she said. "They're yours." I stuffed several into my mouth as Jasper sped away. One candy was sweet. A fistful turned sharp and bitter, like the truth that too much of any consolation can hurt. Jasper's home sat near the city's edge under plane trees that dropped pale leaves in summer. The courtyard smelled of damp clay and turpentine, and inside, the walls were lined with framed photographs of rivers, strangers' faces, and light caught in places I didn't know existed. He lived there with his wife, Maren, and their son, Theo, who was 11 and already skilled at looking at people as if they were a problem to be solved. Jasper insisted on a birthday party. My first week balloons, a 2-tier cake, cousins and friends from an art collective, a camera flash that made me flinch each time it fired. He placed a plastic crown on my head and said, "Today is your rebirth day. From now on, this is your birthday." The adults laughed and clapped. I smiled because smiles were currency, and because Jasper's hand on my shoulder felt like a promise. Maren's smile did not reach her eyes. When the guests left and the apartment quieted, the walls began to carry sound like thin paper carries flame. Behind a closed door, Maren's voice rose. "How long have you been doing this?" she demanded. "Dragging your mistakes into our home?" Jasper spoke low, coaxing. "She's a child," he said. "If you're angry with me, don't burn her for it." Theo watched from his bedroom, his gaze cold and curious, as if he were studying how new animals behaved. That first night I wet the bed. It happened without warning. My body deciding betrayal was safer than waking. When I realized what I had done, panic filled my chest so completely I could barely breathe. The sheets smelled of lavender detergent and softness. I had never slept in anything so clean. Before dawn, I rolled the bedding tight, carried it to the bathroom, and found a plastic tub in the corner. I filled it with water and climbed in, stamping with my small feet, determined to erase evidence before anyone could accuse me. Water splashed across tile. Then Maren's voice froze the air. "What are you doing?" I slipped, fell, and the tub overturned. I threw my arms over my head, bracing for a slap. Maren's hand hovered, then landed not on my face but on my shoulder, gripping hard enough to steady me. "That tub is for the mop," she said flatly. She pointed to a washing machine in the corner like an animal I had not learned to approach. "Sheets go there. This is not a riverbank." She showed me which buttons to turn, how to measure detergent, how to close the lid. Then she said, "From now on, you wash the clothes." It was not kindness, but it was a place in the house, and for a child who had been left behind, being given a task felt like being allowed to exist. I learned quickly, because survival had made me fluent in urgency. Even so, mistakes find children the way storms find low ground. One afternoon, I mixed Maren's white blouse with Jasper's dark work shirts, and when the machine finished, the blouse had clouded into a miserable gray. Maren held it up with 2 fingers as if it might stain her skin. "Do you know what this cost?" she demanded. I skipped lunches to buy it. Jasper tried to soften the moment with that gentle tone that always sounded like an invitation. "We can buy another," he said, as if money were a watercolor he could dilute endlessly. Maren's anger ignited. "Easy for you," she snapped. "You think the world pays for romance." That evening, Jasper came home with a matching blouse and a candy as big as my fist, wrapped in cellophane. He placed it in my palm as if it were a medal. "For the bravest girl in the city," he whispered. I tried to give it to Theo, hoping sugar might dissolve contempt. Theo stared at it and knocked it from my hand. The candy rolled under the shoe rack. "I don't need your charity," he said. The word charity felt like a nail. Later, when no one watched, I crawled and retrieved the candy, wiped the dust off, and ate it alone in the bathroom, because sweetness was easier to swallow without witnesses. Jasper was restless in a way that looked romantic from a distance and exhausting from inside a home. He chased light for his photography projects the way some people chase miracles. After my school papers were finished, he stayed home for nearly 6 weeks, long enough for me to begin believing his presence might be permanent. Then one cloudy afternoon, he left a note on the kitchen table, a promise folded into the shape of an apology, and the motorbike's growl faded down the road. Maren read the note, crushed it in her fist, and turned on me with eyes that had decided to stop being patient. "If he's gone," she said, voice tight, "then you go too." I did not agree to raise the proof of his betrayal. She dragged me to the doorway, opened it, and pointed into the hall. The building's hallway light was broken. Moonlight painted the tiles a cold blue. I sat on the floor with my knees to my chest, not daring to knock again because a second rejection would feel like a verdict. Hours passed in pieces. Eventually the lock clicked. Maren stood there with messy hair and a face worn down by something like regret. "Come in," she said, as if the words cost her. On the table was a bowl of egg noodles steaming gently, chopsticks placed neatly beside it. Marin turned away before I could see her expression. The door to her bedroom closed with a hard sound, but the noodles stayed, and I ate them with shaking hands, tasting salt, warmth, and the fragile possibility that I might not be thrown away again so easily. Jasper called twice a week from wherever he was, telling me about strange roadside shrines, rivers that looked like melted metal at sunrise, a field of flowers bright enough to hurt the eyes, and an old dog that followed him for 3 days as if he were family. Each call ended with the same promise: I have a secret gift for you when I come back. After he spoke to me, he asked for Marin. Her voice sharpened through the receiver. Before Lena arrived, you could vanish for weeks without calling, she snapped. Now you call like you're trying to prove something. Am I less important than the child you found? Jasper's voice was soft, guilty, and unreachable. You're the center, he said. You always were. But words spoken through a phone are like sunlight through glass. They warm without touching. At school, I walked a half step behind Theo, because walking beside him made him angry, and walking ahead felt like theft. When classmates asked, "Is that your sister?" Theo answered loudly, "She's not my sister. She's something my dad picked up." After that, children stopped choosing me for games. During pair activities, I became the last unpaired body standing with my hands clasped. I learned to make myself small enough that even exclusion felt like a quiet kind of belonging. Winter came early the year I turned 8 in Jasper's calendar. One morning I saw Marin's hands tremble as she poured tea, and shadows sat beneath her eyes like bruises. When I asked if she felt unwell, she snapped, "Do you hope I'm sick?" Fear shut my mouth. Later I ran back home for homework I'd forgotten. The living room was quiet in a way that made my skin prickle. Marin lay on the carpet, one arm twisted at an angle that didn't look human. I called her name until my throat ached, then ran to the neighbors. Mrs. Sato, who lived across the hall, drove us to the hospital in her pickup truck, her husband muttering prayers under his breath. In the emergency ward, Marin woke with a grimace. "Stop crying," she rasped. "I'm not dead." Relief burst out of me into sobs I couldn't control. The doctor said Marin had severe anemia and exhaustion, that she needed iron and rest. Theo arrived later, eyes red, and instead of hugging me, he pointed at my chest. "This is because of you," he accused. "Mom was fine before you." The accusation stung because it echoed the belief I carried already, that my existence was an inconvenience the world would rather not accommodate. After 3 days, Marin came home with pills and a list of foods she should eat. Mrs. Sato brought soup at noon, but Marin's appetite was small and my worry was large. I took money Jasper had left in an envelope and went to the butcher, who told me liver was good for blood. Pride kept me from asking how to cook it. I wanted to offer competence, not another problem. Back home, I dragged a stool to the counter, washed the slippery organ, and began to slice it. Theo burst into the kitchen, shouted, and shoved my shoulder. My knife slipped and bit my finger. Blood appeared bright and quick, and Theo's anger turned frantic. "What did you put in the pot?" he demanded, as if I were poisoning his mother on purpose. The commotion woke Marin. She came into the kitchen, saw my bleeding finger, and for a moment her face changed, something softer, flickering behind the hardness. She wrapped my hand in paper towels and asked, "Why are you doing this?" My voice shook. "I wanted to make you better," I said. "I don't want you sick because I'm here." Theo's mouth opened, then closed. He ran upstairs and slammed his door. Marin stared at the liver, then at me, and finally sighed like someone surrendering to an unwanted truth. "If you're going to try," she said, "then try safely. Come here." She showed me how to cook it properly, how to rinse the bitterness away, how to keep the heat low. We ate the dish together in silence. But the silence did not feel like punishment. It felt like a bridge still being built. A week later, my biological parents found us. I opened the door after school because the people outside said my name the way my mother used to, familiar and sharp. My father's face looked older, his jaw tighter. My mother's hair was duller, her eyes red at the corners. They stepped in without waiting for an invitation, as if parenthood gave them keys. "Lena," my mother cried, gripping my shoulders, "we finally found you. They didn't treat you right, did they? Look at you so thin." My father scanned the apartment, the furniture, the shelves of books, the smell of city soap, and his expression shifted into calculation. "Come home," he said. "The highway is being built near the village. Each person gets compensation. We'll have money now. We can be together again. Rich enough," I thought, as if love waited in a wallet. They pulled me toward the door. I grabbed the frame. The paper towels on my finger slipped and left a smear of blood on the wood. My father yanked harder, and my body reacted the way it always had when adults decided I belonged to them. It froze. Marin appeared from the hallway, carrying my medicine cup, and took in the scene in one breath. "You sold her," she said, voice low and lethal. "You took money and you sold a child." My mother flinched. "We had no choice," she whispered. My father snorted. "It was only 2,000, he said. "We'll pay it back once we get the compensation." Theo came barreling down the stairs and threw himself between us, face flushed. "She's my sister," he shouted, the word sister sounding brand new and furious. My father raised his hand as if to strike me, the old reflex of dominance. I flinched, arms over my head. The slap landed on Marin's cheek instead, because she stepped in front of me without hesitation. The crack of skin on skin echoed down the stairwell. Blood appeared at the corner of Marin's lip. Mrs. Sato and 3 other neighbors gathered, drawn by noise and the unmistakable shape of a man hitting a woman. Someone shouted about calling the police. My mother's face drained of color. People in our village feared police the way they feared storms. Not because storms are always cruel, but because storms do not negotiate. Theo grabbed the landline and lifted it. Marin pressed ice to her cheek, eyes cold as she spoke. "If you insist she is your child," she said, "then explain why you accepted money to hand her over. Buying and selling children is a crime." My father's bravado faltered. My mother began to babble excuses, dragging his sleeve. Under the gaze of strangers and the threat of law, my parents backed away. At the stairwell, my mother turned, held out a packet of peppermint candies wrapped in newspaper, and whispered, "Take them, please." I looked at the candies and felt my throat tighten. "They taste bitter," I said. And I didn't take them. The door shut behind them with a final sound that felt like a lock clicking into place. After the crowd dispersed, Marin went to the bathroom mirror and pressed ice against her cheek. She moved with the rigid control of someone determined not to be seen breaking. I stood in the doorway trembling, guilt burning through me. A word rose in me like a tide. A word I had never dared to use because it sounded like possession. "Mom," I said, accidentally, the syllable slipping out before fear could catch it. Marin's hand paused. She stared at me as though the word had struck her more deeply than my father's slap. Then she turned away and muttered, rougher than she intended, "Don't say that when you want something. Say it because you mean it." Theo hovered behind her, fists clenched, and muttered, "You can say it. You already did." That night we moved. Marin called her younger brother, who owned an empty apartment above his hardware shop, and by midnight our belongings were packed into boxes that smelled of tape and dust. Snow began to fall, fat flakes softening the city's edges. In the pickup truck, Theo sat beside me, shoulders stiff, as if affection might crack him. Marin stared out the window, jaw set. I watched streetlights smear gold across the glass and tried to believe that leaving meant safety, not abandonment wearing a different coat. School gossip followed anyway. Children have a talent for smelling weakness, and my story carried the sharp scent of scandal. "Her parents sold her," a boy whispered behind me. "Even my mom wouldn't sell our dog." I walked faster, pretending words were wind. Theo waited at the gate that day and, for the first time, stood beside me instead of ahead. "Ignore them," he muttered. The sentence was small, but the effort behind it made it enormous. Jasper returned 2 weeks later, exhausted and sunburned, carrying a canvas bag and the promised secret gift. He arrived to find our old apartment empty. Panic drove him to Marin's brother's shop, where he pounded on the door until Marin appeared and told him, flatly, what had happened. Jasper's face collapsed. He held Marin's cheek carefully, seeing the faint yellowing bruise like a stain he could never wash out. He wanted to apologize. Marin cut him off. "Don't decorate this with words," she said. "Be here." Jasper nodded as if he had been given a simple instruction and finally understood it. He hung the secret gift on our new balcony. A wind chime made of sea glass and small metal pieces, each one catching light differently. "It's for Lena's rebirth day," he said softly. When the wind moved, it rang with a clear, careful music that sounded like someone trying to speak gently in a loud world. For a while, Jasper did what he had never learned to do before. He stayed. He learned Theo's medication schedule and taped it to the fridge. He cooked soup badly and ate his own mistakes without complaint. He walked me to school even when Theo scoffed at him for being embarrassing. Marin did not forgive quickly. She carried resentment like a tool she needed for protection. Yet she began to soften at the edges, as if constant sturdiness was slowly teaching Jasper a new kind of love. Then, in late August, an ordinary evening broke open like glass. Marin told Theo to buy a watermelon and to pick up soy sauce. Theo jogged down the steps, turned to grin through the window, and lifted a hand in mock salute. A car came too fast around the corner, tires squealing. The impact threw Theo onto the asphalt. The sound was not a crash so much as a dull, horrible thud, the sound of a body meeting fate. Marin's scream tore through the building. For one heartbeat, I froze, then forced myself to move because someone had to do the things adults forget when their hearts fall apart. I called the ambulance with shaking fingers, reciting our address the way Jasper had made me recite my name. I pressed my palms against Theo's bloodied shirt and begged him to stay awake. His eyes rolled, unfocused, and he whispered my name as if it were a rope. At the hospital, the surgeons took Theo through doors that swung shut like a verdict. Marin collapsed into a chair, shaking, and Jasper paced until a nurse scolded him for wearing a hole into the floor. Marin's brother called Jasper's phone, but Jasper's signal had been weak earlier and he had switched it off to charge. When they reached him, the call was answered by a young woman's voice that said, brightly, "Jasper's showering. I can take a message." The sentence hit Marin like a slap. She stared at the handset as if it were another betrayal, and then began to laugh quiet at first, then louder, laughter that was nothing like joy. It was the sound of a dam cracking under too much water. Jasper arrived at dawn, hair wet, face pale, apologies tumbling out. Marin looked at him and said, in a voice so calm it frightened me, "I want a divorce." Jasper flinched but did not argue. Theo's surgery was successful, but the doctors warned of a long recovery and the possibility of lasting weakness. In the months that followed, divorce papers remained on the table like a storm cloud, and the house learned to live around them. One night I found Jasper sitting by the balcony, the wind chime ringing faintly above him, smoke curling from a cigarette he held as if it were another kind of pen. He did not look romantic then. He looked tired, like a man who had run out of ways to pretend he could fix things with beauty. "Do you hate me?" he asked. I answered honestly. "I don't hate you," I said. "You make the world interesting." I did not add the rest. That interesting is not the same as safe. Jasper stared into the dark and nodded, as if he heard the unsaid anyway. After that, he began to do ordinary things with fierce attention. He learned to fold laundry the way Marin did, corners aligned. He listened when Marin spoke, even when her words were sharp, and he stopped trying to win her back with grand gestures. Marin's anger did not disappear, but it changed shape. It became something she could set down for a few minutes without fearing it would vanish and leave her defenseless. She began writing film reviews online, turning her precise mind into paragraphs. Strangers praised her insight. Each comment seemed to restore a thread of herself. Jasper sold a photo series and used the money to fix the hallway light, replace the broken kitchen tile, and buy Theo a sturdier desk. The house did not become perfect, but it became held. Stress still did its slow damage. Marin's hair began to thin, first in the brush, then in the shower drain, then in the mirror where scalp showed through like pale maps. She tried to hide it with careful parting and, later, with a wig. She went to my school on a rainy afternoon for a parent conference, and as we stood under the overhang with dozens of other families, a gust yanked her wig sideways. The wig skittered across wet pavement like an embarrassed animal. People stared. Whispers hissed. Marin's face went blank with humiliation, and she lunged after the wig as if retrieving it could restore dignity. An umbrella opened above us, huge and green with a beer logo, stolen from the barbecue shop downstairs. Jasper held it with one hand and, with the other, lifted his own stylish hairpiece from his head and flourished it like a magician. Beneath it, he was completely bald. He grinned at the staring crowd. "We're a matching set," he announced. "Couples do shoes, jackets, profile pictures. We do heads." Someone laughed, and the laughter broke the tension like a stick. Marin's face turned crimson. "Stop making it worse," she hissed, grabbing his sleeve. Jasper, unbothered, leaned close and said softly, "If they stare, let them stare at me." That night, while Marin showered and Jasper made tea, I borrowed clippers from the barber downstairs and persuaded Theo, still weak but stubborn, to help me. We locked ourselves in his room and took turns buzzing our hair down to the scalp. When Marin opened the door and saw us, her mouth fell open, and then the strangest sound came from her, a half laugh, half sob. "You idiots," she whispered, walking over and touching my bare head as if confirming I was real. I wrapped my arms around her waist. "If you're afraid to be seen," I said into her shirt, "then let us be seen with you." Theo pretended to gag. "You're so dramatic," he muttered. But he leaned into her side anyway. Jasper watched from the hallway, eyes shining, and for once he did not speak. The next day I went to school wearing a beanie. The principal called me to his office, saw my shaved head when I removed the hat, and opened his mouth to scold. I explained what had happened, and his expression softened into something like sadness. "Keep the hat on," he said gently, "and if anyone bothers you, send them to me." Outside the office, Theo nudged my shoulder. "Told you you'd look fierce," he said. I smiled, and the smile did not feel like currency. It felt like my own. By the time Theo returned fully to school, the divorce papers had yellowed at the corners. Maren and Jasper fought less. Not because the problems vanished, but because they were learning a new language of partnership, one that asked for consistency instead of spectacle. Jasper still traveled sometimes, but he traveled differently. He left schedules. He called every night. He came back when he promised. When he found a beautiful sunrise, he photographed it, and then sent it home with a caption for Maren that was less poetic than honest. "I wish you were here to see this, and I'm coming back tomorrow." Maren kept writing, and her reviews became popular enough to bring income. She did not gloat. She simply stood a little taller. Theo, who had always used cruelty as armor, began to use humor instead. When classmates asked about my shaved head, he told them I was training to be a secret agent and that the first rule was to stop being annoying. They laughed, and the laughter didn't sting. On my rebirth day, Jasper baked a lopsided cake, and Maren fixed its frosting with quick, competent hands. Theo hung the wind chime higher, so it rang more clearly. When the three of them sang to me, the sound felt strange and heavy and real. I blew out the candles and wished for something I had never dared to wish for before. Not money, not escape, but ordinary years. A year later, the past found me again in the cafeteria line. I was 15 and hungry, as teenagers always are, and I asked the server for sweet and sour ribs with practiced politeness. The woman behind the counter looked up, and my stomach dropped as if I had missed a step. Her uniform was stained, her hands rough, her face older than my memories, but I recognized my biological mother instantly. She recognized me too. The ladle paused midair. "Lena," she breathed, voice shaking. Students behind me murmured. My mother leaned forward through the serving window and grabbed my wrist. "Come home," she pleaded. "I did wrong. I know I did, but I'm still your mother." The pressure of her fingers made my skin crawl with old sensations. I wanted to vanish, but the line pressed forward, bodies impatient. My voice came out steady because anger can lend steadiness. "Please serve the ribs," I said, loud enough for the manager to hear. My mother's eyes filled. "Don't be like this," she begged. "Your father's sick. Your brother needs you. The compensation money is gone. We're struggling." Her honesty arrived too late. A letter delivered to an empty house. The manager came over, scolding her for delaying service. My mother clung to my wrist and tried to speak over him. And suddenly I was surrounded by staring teenagers, their curiosity sharp as glass. Humiliation rose in me like fever. I stared down at my mother and asked the question that had haunted my childhood like a recurring dream. "If me and your son were both drowning," I said, "and you could save only one, who would you pull from the water?" My mother blinked, thrown by logic. "Why would that happen?" she stammered. "Answer," I insisted, voice cracking. She opened her mouth, closed it, and in that hesitation, I found my answer. "You don't get to make me your proof of regret," I said, pulling my wrist free. "You don't get to kneel in public and call it love." My mother's face twisted, and desperation sharpened into accusation. "So you're too good for us now?" she hissed. The words were familiar. They were the village's favorite weapon against anyone who climbed out of the mud. I leaned closer and spoke quietly, so only she could hear. "I'm not too good," I said. "I'm just done being disposable." The principal was called. The manager threatened to fire my mother. The cafeteria buzzed. I walked away carrying my tray, hands trembling, ribs cooling, appetite gone. That afternoon, the principal drove me home. In the car, he said, "You are not responsible for choices adults made before you were old enough to spell your own name." I nodded, staring at passing streetlights. letting his words settle where guilt used to sit. At home, Maren listened without interrupting. Theo clenched his jaw until the muscles jumped. Jasper paced, then stopped pacing, then sat like a man who finally understood that being calm is also a kind of strength. "She will keep coming," Maren said. "Not as a threat, but as a fact." Jasper nodded. "Then we make sure Lena is protected," he replied. They went to a lawyer. Papers were filed that made my adoption unshakable. Not just in sentiment, but in ink. On the night the documents were stamped, Jasper hung a new wind chime beside the first one. This one made from small bells that sounded deeper, steadier. Theo wrote my name on the back of a photo Jasper had taken of our balcony in snow and taped it above my desk. Maren brewed tea and placed it in front of me without a word. The gesture so ordinary it felt monumental. After the lawyer's office, our home did not become magically simple, but it became sturdier, like a chair repaired with honest nails. Jasper made a calendar and taped it on the refrigerator, writing his travel days in ink instead of vague promises. When he had to leave for a shoot, he packed my lunch the night before, even if the sandwich looked lopsided, and he left a list of phone numbers on the counter as if preparedness could soothe the fear he had created. Maren did not praise him out loud, but she stopped searching his face for the next disappointment, and she began leaving the spare room door open during the day. Jasper set aside envelopes marked Theo, Rehab, and Lina School, and, for the first time since I had arrived, money stayed where it was meant to stay. On Saturdays he took Theo to therapy, waded through the exercises, then walked us home slowly, refusing to turn the outing into a grand gesture. The ordinariness felt unfamiliar, and because it was unfamiliar, it felt like a miracle we could practice. In October, Jasper came home with a battered case and set it carefully on the dining table the way he set down lenses. "Secret gift," he announced. And Theo rolled his eyes with practiced suffering. Inside the case was not a toy and not a dress, but a small, handmade photo book bound with twine. Each page held a photograph Jasper had taken of ordinary moments since I arrived. My shoes drying by the heater, Theo asleep with his homework on his chest, Maren's hands kneading dough, Mrs. Sato laughing as she scolded Jasper for tracking mud into the hallway. Under every photo, Jasper had written one sentence in careful block letters, as if he were learning a new alphabet. The captions weren't poetic. They were simple promises. Here, still here, tomorrow too. Theo reached for the book and pretended he was only checking the binding, but his thumb lingered on a picture of himself holding the dog-eared physical therapy sheet. Maren turned a page, inhaled sharply, and then shut the book as if she needed a second before she could handle gratitude. "You did this instead of running," she said. "I did this while running," Jasper admitted, "so I could remember what I was supposed to come back to." On the day Jasper had declared my rebirth day, Maren surprised me by baking a cake herself. It leaned slightly to the left and the frosting cracked in a few places, but she placed 9 tiny candles on top anyway and lit them with a match that shook in her fingers. "We're not counting by your village rules," she said. "We're counting by the days you've been here, alive and safe." Theo brought out a cheap plastic crown from a party store and set it on my head with exaggerated ceremony, then whispered, "Don't get used to it." Jasper opened the balcony door so the wind could carry out the smell of sugar, and the sea glass chime he had hung months earlier answered with a soft, bright tapping, like it approved of the celebration. Maren watched the shifting light from the chime's pieces for a long time, then told me to make a wish that wasn't about being perfect. I wished for something plain, that this house would keep choosing us in ordinary daylight. When I blew out the candles, Theo clapped once, sharp and embarrassed, and Maren reached for my hand without looking at it, as if touching me were no longer a decision that required fear. 2 weeks later, my biological father appeared outside our building, alone this time, smelling of cigarettes and entitlement. He didn't shout. He used the tone of a man who believes control is easiest when it is polite. "Lena," he said, "your mother has been sick with worry. Those city people love to play savior, but they can throw you away any time. Come home for a visit. Your brother misses you." The old part of me wanted to obey simply to end the pressure, but another part remembered Maren stepping in front of a raised hand and taking the blow. Theo moved first, shoulders squared. Standing so close to me, I felt the heat of his anger. "She isn't going anywhere," he said. My father smiled thinly. "Boy, this doesn't concern you." Theo's voice shook, but he didn't step back. "It concerns me because she's family." Jasper came down the stairs then, not dramatic, not loud, just present in the doorway like a wall. "You are trespassing," Jasper said, and his calm carried more threat than shouting. My father glanced at me as if I were still a possession he could reclaim, then spat on the pavement and walked away, muttering that the law was on Blood's side. When he was gone, Jasper didn't hug me immediately. He asked, "Are you okay?" As if my answer mattered more than his performance of comfort. I nodded, and Theo swore under his breath, then looked embarrassed and added, "Sorry, Mom hates swearing." That winter, Marin's writing began to earn real attention. People shared her reviews because she didn't pretend movies were wiser than life. She wrote about them as if they were mirrors you could tilt to see hidden corners of yourself. A small magazine offered her a column, and when she received the email she read it 3 times, blinking hard, then handed the screen to Theo as if she needed another person to confirm the words were real. Theo grinned, genuinely this time, and said, "Mom, you're famous." Marin snorted, but the sound held pride. The first check was not large, yet she used it to buy groceries without counting coins at the register, and she bought a tiny bottle of expensive hair serum as an act of stubborn hope. She also bought a set of cheap notebooks and tossed one onto the table in front of Jasper. "Right where you'll be," she told him. Jasper opened the notebook like it might bite him, then began to fill pages with plain details, dates, addresses, train numbers, phone contacts. It wasn't poetry, but Marin's shoulders dropped a fraction when she saw it, and that small release felt like a door unlocking. Later that night, Marin sat beside me on the couch and told me something she had never said aloud. "When Jasper brought you home," she admitted, "I was furious because I thought you were proof that I wasn't enough. I thought you were a punishment for trusting him." Her voice shook. "But you were a child, and you looked at me like I held the gate to your survival. I hated that power, and I hated myself for having it." I leaned into her side, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breathing. "I was afraid of you," I whispered. "But I was also waiting for you." Marin exhaled, long and tired. "I'm here," she said. It wasn't poetry. It was better. Theo limped in, mostly out of habit now, and pretended not to care. He draped a blanket over both of us and muttered, "Don't hog, Mom." The word Mom from his mouth was a small miracle, casual and real. Jasper watched from the doorway, eyes shining. For once he did not try to turn the scene into a speech. Sometimes, I realized, the best art is the moment you do not interfere with. Outside, the wind chimes rang. The higher one chimed like sea glass, bright and delicate. The lower one answered with steady bells, a deeper sound that made the delicate notes feel less fragile. The wind moved through them and carried their music into our rooms. Not loud, not insistent, just present. Years later, when Theo graduated and the school insisted on family photos, Jasper set his camera on a tripod and joined the frame instead of hiding behind the lens. Theo, taller than Jasper now, put an arm around his father's shoulders in a gesture that was both teasing and tender. Marin stood on my other side, her hair grown back in stubborn curls, her column clipped and pinned above her desk like a medal she had earned the hard way. When the principal asked who I was in the family, Marin answered before anyone else could open their mouth. "This is my daughter," she said, and the word daughter landed with the weight of certainty. Afterward, in the noisy courtyard, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, a photo of my biological brother as a toddler, and beneath it a line that read, "We could have been happy if you came back." I stared at the screen until Theo leaned over and said, without judgment, "Block it." I did. That night, back on our balcony, the sea glass wind chime tapped softly in the breeze, and the sound threaded through our laughter and our tiredness like music that did not demand perfection. I thought of the old canteen kitchen and the first square of bitter chocolate, and I realized the taste had changed in my memory. It was still bitter, but it no longer meant only hunger. It meant the beginning of a life where people stayed. I thought of the helmet that had felt like a planet on my head, of peppermint candies that had turned bitter when I ate too many, of a woman's slap that landed on the wrong cheek because someone chose to stand in front of me. I had spent my early years believing I belonged nowhere, that any warmth was borrowed and would be reclaimed. Now I understood something slower and harder and more miraculous. Belonging is not a spell that lasts until midnight. Belonging is a decision made again and again in ordinary daylight, even when it costs, even when it bruises, even when it would be